Well, welcome everybody to another Grace Hudson Museum virtual program. My name's David Burton. I'm the director of the Grace Hudson Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to a program we're calling Kim Stringfellow and the Mojave Project. Um, Before we go any further, though, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. Um, uh, we, I want to acknowledge the original caretakers of the land. And here at the Grace Hudson Museum, we're in southern Mendocino County. And this area, as well as our county neighbors to the east, Lake County, and south, Sonoma County, we comprise the area that's the ancestral homeland of the Pomo people, who maintain a strong and vital culture today. We are proud to be their neighbors and will do everything possible to create honor on this land that we are lucky enough to inhabit. Um, Also, I want to mention that our program tonight deals with the Mojave Desert, and there are many native peoples who live in that area, including Chemehuevi, Cahuilla, Paiute, and Mojave, just to name a few. And what we'd like to do is just encourage you, wherever you are viewing from, get to know the native peoples who are in your area, get to know their history. I think we will all be better off for that. So to tonight. Um, Postcards from Mecca, as I mentioned, is our special exhibition through August 22nd. It looks at the Coachella Valley and the surrounding desert areas of Southern California in the early part of the 20th century. And given the historical nature of that show, I thought it would be great if we could bring in somebody to talk about uh, the desert lands of Southern California as they are today and help us better understand them. Uh, I became familiar with the work of Kim Stringfellow just about 10 years ago when I was the head of the research center at the Autry National Center, now called the Autry Museum. In 2012, the Autry gave the second Theo Westenberger Award to Kim Stringfellow. And at the time, Kim was pretty much, I guess, wrapping up the work that she had done on Jackrabbit Homesteads, which is a fascinating piece of history that not many people are familiar about. It explores kind of like a mid-20th century homestead act that encouraged people to homestead in, I believe it was Wonder Valley, which is the area between 29 Palms and Amboy. If you wander off the Highway 40 and drive from Amboy south, you'll pass through Wonder Valley. There are a lot of homesteads that appeared and then were no more. And then in more recent times, artists have begun to populate or repopulate that area and kind of give a renewed birth to the area in a very different way than it was originally intended. Kim is an artist, a scholar, an educator, a writer, an independent curator, and she is based in Joshua Tree, California. She's joining us from Joshua Tree this evening. Her work interweaves cultural geography, geology, photography, fine art, electronic media, interview, and publications, all in the service of achieving a greater understanding of the complexity of desert lands. She is also an associate professor of multimedia at San Diego State University's School of Art and Design. Among her many accomplishments and accolades, Kim has received fellowships from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and from the Guggenheim Foundation. And as I mentioned earlier, she was the recipient of the 2012 of the Theo Westenberger Award for Artistic Excellence, honoring the achievements of contemporary women in photography, film, and media. She is the author of numerous books, including, I'm going to cite a couple, Jackrabbit Homestead, Tracing the Small Tract Act in the Southern California Landscape, 1938 to 2008, and Greetings from the Salton Sea, Folly and Intervention in the Southern California Landscape, 1905 to 2005. And most recently, there is the beginning of a series of readers related to her current endeavor, the Mojave Project. You can learn a lot more about Kim, about all the projects she's done previous to Mojave Project. You can also find a tab where I believe you can purchase some of her books can still be purchased on her website. It's kimstringfellow.com. I am grateful and very pleased to welcome to our virtual stage, Kim Stringfellow.
Thank you, David. Thanks for that introduction and for inviting me to be one of your guest speakers. And greetings to everyone out there. I'm sorry I can't look out in the audience and see your face, but I appreciate you taking the time to sign in and learn more about my work and the Mojave Desert. So for those of you who may not know of my work and of my practice, I thought I would do an overview of some of my previous projects that David has actually outlined and discuss those so you can see how each of these projects relate to one another. As we mentioned earlier, Greetings from the Salton Sea really was the first project that I started working on in the Southern California desert region. It was a thesis project actually when I was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So imagine that I was going back and forth from Chicago in the winter to sunny Borrego Springs and the Salton Sea to work on this. And you know, at the time, I'm primarily a photographer, but I've been interested in working across media. And during this period, I was teaching myself how to develop websites because I decided it would be the perfect platform to distribute my work publicly. And, you know, this was about 1998, and I guess I was right. You know, websites for artists are ubiquitous. And, you know, I started working in multimedia rich formats to distribute this type of work. So this is the installation. It's a book project. And it really set the template for the type of work that I do currently, which is a research-based art practice. Really what happened when I was working on the Salton Sea project was I felt the need to really understand what was happening in terms of culture, of biology, ecology to this particular area. And I delved into that aspect and documented this former area that was very popular during the late 1950s and 60s for recreation. Actually, there were more visitors to the Salton Sea than Yosemite at the time. And this was, you know, the detritus of this particular time. And during the late 60s and 70s, there started to be a lot of flooding and a lot of environmental issues because of the way the sea formed. And so I was really focused on those particular aspects of this project. In hindsight, you know, I think Greetings from the Salton Sea, it's a wonderful document of the particular time I was there, but there is this kind of focus on what I call ruin porn. And one thing that I wish I had gone into further was the Native American presence in that area. So, you know, that's something that I'm continuing to learn about. But this idea of research-based work, text with image was very important for this particular project. I also have worked on other projects. I'm not going to go into the Hanford project, but I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I was really interested in the atomic history of Washington State in terms of Hanford being the production facility for plutonium during the war, and how that has led to, you know, massive contamination of that particular area that's along the Columbia Reach. So, you know, some of these projects, if you're interested, you can visit the individual sites. So if you click on view, it's going to lead you to a synopsis of the project, and then you can go to the website for that particular project. Invisible 5 is a collaborative project that I did. This was the first audio tour project that I worked on, and this was a collaboration between San Francisco-based artist Amy Balkin, Tim Halber, and several nonprofits. It's an environmental justice audio tour of the I-5 corridor between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And so we interviewed people along this particular route that have been affected by industrial waste facilities, industrial agriculture, all sorts of different activities, and told a story from their perspective. The idea was for, or is for people, this is still available publicly at the website or through SoundCloud, is for you to download the entire program and listen to it as you're driving. This was kind of early on, so it's not geo-specific, and it doesn't necessarily need to work that way. But although, you know, some of the stories, you know, they're from 15 years ago, but they're still very, very interesting stories, very compelling to delve into. So I encourage you, if you happen to be driving that section of I-5, please download and listen to this particular project. So right after I was working, or actually while I was working on Invisible 5, I began research on Jackrabbit Homestead. So this was a project that I wanted to work on because I wanted to delve into more histories of the Southern California desert. And I had been coming up to Joshua Tree since the mid-1990s. And I had been familiar with these little shacks that dotted the landscape. These were the result of the Small Tract Act of 1938, which allowed US citizens to lease out 5 acres of land. And if they proved up by building a small structure, started at 120 square feet, and then requirements changed over time, you would get that 5 acres for almost for free. You would just pay the assessor fee, which was like 10 to 20 an acre. So it became very popular in the mid-century, and it is one of the things that created the development pattern of the Morongo Basin, which I live in Joshua Tree. It had a lot of, created a lot of impact on this particular area. And it's interesting to see how these little cabins have become very popular over time. Actually, they're very popular for vacation rentals for people coming out to the desert. So this project mapped out a very particular section of the Morongo Basin. So I'll show you a map here. So this is an old vintage map. This is the Palm Springs area, and this is Highway 62. So the area that I was documenting is called Wonder Valley. And this is kind of the end of the line. You can see that you're just into kind of open desert when you get out this way. This isn't the only place that these Jackrabbit Homesteads were, you know, sited at. They were throughout the United States, actually. Small tracts were available in Florida, but there wasn't a lot of acreage. The majority of the small tracts that were opened for leasing were in Southern California area. There were also some in Nevada and Arizona, and they were primarily situated in the Morongo Basin of the Mojave Desert area. So this is east of 29 Palms, where the Marine base is. There were also tracts down in the Palm Springs area. You will see cabins throughout Lancaster, Palmdale, Antelope Valley area. Once you recognize these, you start to see these throughout the desert. So these cabins, I decided to really do this research and map these out. So what I did was actually go into this area of the desert, and I did a very methodical mapping and photography of these different structures, both interior and exterior. And I only focused on ones that were abandoned, because there are occupied cabins. And so this gives you kind of an idea of what these things look like. They were very eclectic. There were different types of cabins. Some cabins were kit homes that people could purchase, and you could have that kit home manufacturer come out and build the cabin if in case you couldn't build something. As I was working on this project, I started to meet other artists that were interested in the cabins, and also artists who had actually purchased cabins in Wonder Valley and made these into these beautiful retreats and studios. And so that became part of the project as well, because there was this interesting turnover from the original homesteaders in the 1950s who built these cabins. And then when they became derelict in, say, the 1960s, early 70s, and then there were people that started to come out, and because of the affordability, the beauty of the desert, started to purchase and refurbish these. Not to say that all have been refurbished, but to give you an idea, this is Perry and Doug Smith. They have a beautiful cabin in Wonder Valley area. And this is, waiting for this thing to load up. This is the tile work that the gentleman on the left does. The entire house is covered in this type of tile work. Other artists, such as Andrea Zattel, are based out in Joshua Tree. This is Andrea. And these are some other artists that have either, you know, have studios or homes in Jackrabbit Homesteads, or have used those spaces as installations and so forth. So this project actually turned into an audio tour project. Once I had completed all the research and had done the book, I decided that it would be great to get people to actually drive into the landscape and really see these firsthand. And this has always been a goal of a lot of my work, is to actually get people within the spaces that I'm documenting. So I started doing tours, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this was one of the first independent audio tours that I worked on. And this goes through the history. There's a couple of people talking about the history. Then I also interview artists like Andrea Zattel and Chris Carhar and architect Stephanie Smith. They discuss the importance of the cabins to their own practice, their lives, and you know, what they could foresee them representing in terms of this idea of smaller spaces, more compact spaces, which of course we're seeing now. We're seeing so much interest in tiny homes, smaller houses. So I think this has actually really kind of fed this desire to downsize, to really evaluate our lifestyles to make them more sustainable. So this project was essentially completed in 2009, and the Autry, it was wonderful to receive this award, and with the Theo Westenberger Award, I had an exhibit that of Jackrabbit Homestead that was over a year. So it really was a project that made its way into the public. And, you know, that was just like a wonderful culmination. But little did I know that I would have a resurgence of interest with this project. And this past year, I was able to actually create a Jackrabbit Homestead for Desert X 2021, which is site-specific work that and projects and installations, many very large-scale installations that are temporary sited throughout the Coachella Valley. And so I proposed a Jackrabbit Homestead based on the writings of a single woman homesteader, Catherine Van Peterson, who homesteaded in the Palm Desert area. And she wrote about her experience in Desert Magazine. And this was one of the original pieces of research that I was very much interested in when I did the book. So I returned to that for this particular project. And it's a collaboration with a musician and artist, Jim White, and singer-songwriter Claire Campbell. We actually took the edited writings of Catherine Venn, and we created this beautiful audioscape. So when you come to the cabin, which is actually now on display in Joshua Tree locally, you can still see it if you visit Joshua Tree. And once you come to the cabin, you'll start to hear this voice. And she's telling about her experience, about how she, you know, her love of the desert, her experiences, her discoveries. It's really quite beautiful. So if you're not able to actually visit this spot, you know, there's photographs. This was at the site that was in Palm Desert. And the idea was you're kind of a voyeur because of COVID. In the scale of this space, we didn't want people to actually come inside. So I designed it with 6 windows, and you peek inside to see this world that I created, which is a period recreation of, you know, early 1950s of what I would think her cabin would be. She called it Rock Hill, and so I loved finding this vintage painting of a kind of Rock Hill area that's in here. She befriended a coyote that she called Boy, and so these are drawings of what I thought Boy would look like. And this is Catherine Venn with her son. I was able to connect with her family, and I told them about the project I was doing, and they were very happy to see her work, you know, brought back out into the public. So I learned more about her. She actually lived to be 101. She didn't stay in the Palm Desert area, but she returned to Palm Desert 2 different times after she had homesteaded there originally. And, you know, it was toward the end of her life. So if you'd like to listen to the full program, which is about 36 minutes, you can do so online as well here. And this is an essay I wrote about the project that I reconsider who were the people that benefited from Jackrabbit homesteading and who did not, because that's something I've been thinking a lot about, with this particular project. It's always good to kind of reevaluate past work and to look at it with a fresh perspective. So I encourage you to read this to get some insight into that. Okay, so So I also want to go over another project. This is kind of timely because I just drove through Owens Valley in Bishop to go camping for 6 days up in Tuolumne Meadows. I was hiked about 34 miles this past week, not continuously, I didn't backpack. And it's a bittersweet because a friend of mine, Harry Williams, who is one of the speakers in this audio tour, which is the history of the Los Angeles Aqueduct between 1913 and 2013 from the perspective of Owens Valley residents and activists, environmentalists. There's also LA DWP people that are interviewed as part of this as well. So if you're not familiar, the water that historically has supplied, the area that has historically supplied the majority of the drinking water for the city of Los Angeles comes from the Owens Valley. The city of Los Angeles owns the entire watershed throughout the Owens Valley where the aqueduct originates. And it's a very substantial system. Of course, this has led to this idea that Owens Valley is this water colony. And there are aspects of this occupation of the city of Los Angeles that are very, very problematic from a multitude of perspectives. But at the same time, if you're familiar with this area, you know that it's largely undeveloped. And the reason it's undeveloped is because Los Angeles doesn't want development in the watershed because that would require water. So it's a very complex history. It's a history that everyone in California should know about. A lot of people assume Chinatown is more of the actual history, and it is not. I think that what really happened, over time in Owens Valley is actually more interesting than the film Chinatown. So I want to just play one of these tracks of Harry Williams. And because a week and a half ago,
we have a mural downtown, and it was a big controversy.
Harry, he passed from respiratory illness. If you know anything about some of the air quality issues in Owens Valley, the Owens Lake, which the city of Los Angeles dried out when they created the Los Angeles Aqueduct, there would be a lot of particulate. It was actually the largest producer of PM10 particulate in the nation. And they've been forced over the last 20 years through litigation to rewater, to apply different technologies to keep the dust down. And this was also pressured by the military. China Lake Naval area is nearby, and the dust issues were so problematic for them that was costing them so much money. They also pressured the city of Los Angeles to have to deal with this particular situation. So over time, actually, they apply as much water to Owens Valley, Owens Lake, I'm sorry, annually as it's the same amount as the San Francisco city water supply. So Harry was a water protector. He was an educator. He was an outspoken critic of LADWP, but in a very positive way. And he spoke for not only the Bishop Paiute, but the Paiute and Shoshone throughout this area of Owens Valley. So I'm going to just show you this note that you can read. I guess I'll read it out loud. This is from a student from the urban school in San Francisco. They take they would take the kids out for this field trip to learn about ecology and the history of water in California. So she says, it was so nice to meet you several weeks ago. Thank you for taking time to show our California Studies class around your home, Owens Valley. Your perspective was so important, and I found your passion and dedication truly inspiring. It was so strange to drive through the desert afterwards for hours until we reached LA and saw proof of Owens Valley water springing up in all the lawns and fountains in the area. Thank you for opening my eyes to the hardships, past and present, occurring in Owens Valley. Cecilia. So I'm going to play this track for you.
We have a mural downtown, and it was a big controversy when the Mural Society painted it. It's on this little pink building. I don't know if you've seen it. The guy that painted it, he looked back, and it's got the Sierras in the background with the orchards and everything, but right in the middle there's this pump. And around the pump it's just gray, and what it signifies is LA started pumping the life and the color out of the area. It's turned everything gray, pumped all the water out of here and sent all that life and that color down to LA. Yeah, my name is Harry Williams. I got into the environmental world around in 1996. I joined the Owens Valley Committee, and I started studying up on as much as I could because LADWP was drying up my homeland. Over the last 5 years, through some of the people in White Mountain Research Station, I got involved with teaching and talking to students about the political side of land and water in Owens Valley. We talked to the urban schooler one day, and they sent me back this little letter from this one girl. And she goes, after we got done talking to you, we traveled for several hours to the desert. Then as we pulled into LA, we could see what you were talking about, all the green and the lawns and the fountains. But that was all the water from your area, she goes. And I understand what you meant by sucking the water and the color out of the area. This valley's always been about water. From Oak Creek all the way to Pine Creek, every one of the streams that came off the Sierras had ancient irrigation systems on them. They spread the water not to get to one place to the other, but for the water to drain, to seep into the ground. Because once you got really wet ground and water was in the ground, then you got a lot of growth, and then growth brought animals, so you had more stuff to hunt and feed on. The irrigator was an elected position for different little parts of our tribes. There was like 3 different main tribes in the Bishop area and a bunch of family units, but every one of them elected a Tevezu. He was the irrigator, and to irrigate meant Tevezu do it. Those sort of separate words that we've used that cause the archaeologists and the linguists to try to understand, did we create our own irrigation system or did we adopt it from somebody else? But I always figured we created it by just watching the things nature does. You put water on the ground, you get growth, you get life. That's just a natural fact. And so that's what I'm really interested about, how this country looked before any settlers got here. You ready to take a ride now? Yeah, right here. You see this little tree? It's probably around 1880s or so is when it probably died, and they stopped using this. But this ditch system goes straight across there, and it'll go almost to that one little hill over there. Then it goes straight across to the creek. It's fed by Bishop Creek. They brought it over here. When I was a little kid, we used to rabbit hunt out here, and I always wondered. I ran into a irrigation diversion made out of wood, and I was going, what's this doing out in the desert? I never did think of it, but then later on in life, I just said, you know, that's how I found out about these engine irrigation systems. There's about, right below here, about right over in that little yellow area, used to be a swamp. I got to see it on a plat book one day. From here on down, it was all green, completely green. It was fed by ancient irrigation systems, all as far as you could see. Everything was just fed. Look at the old tree stumps right here. It'd be amazing to see how green it really was. I'm really concerned about the area. I go out and talk against 2DWP and tell them how wrong they are to take so much water, but it just goes right through one ear and out the other. Well, they treated us like a colony, like they're the emperors and we're the colonists. They still treat us that way. Their meetings are one-sided. They'll take the county to court anytime they could because county can't afford to go to court. I've been involved when the Lower Owens River project was there. I was in the court when LADWP was ordered to do the Lower Owens River project by a certain date. If they didn't, they were shutting down the second aqueduct. The room went completely quiet except for me. I smiled and giggled. But the only thing that moves LADWP is a court order. This year they pumped 91,000 acre-feet from the area, when the year before then they pumped 78,000. So this year we supplied LA with 71% of their water. When it was a record snowfall up here and they didn't need to. One thing I found out, it rains enough in LA and they allow all the water to run off into the ocean without trying to collect any of it. But that would supply LA with all of its water if they tried to collect some of their water from the rainfall. It's an ugly thing, the way they treat this area. They treat this beautiful valley like a commodity and they can buy and sell it and don't matter whatever. I have to fight it. I'm not leaving. My son, my relations, nieces, nephews, hopefully my grandkids one day, they're going to still be living here. I don't want dust being thrown in their face. I want it to be that pristine place that they talk about.
Okay, I'm gonna. So thank you for listening to that. You know, it's a real. I'm very sad. You know, Harry was 64 and he had so much to share with us, and I'm really glad that his voice has been preserved. If you're interested in learning more about Owens Valley and Harry in particular, and about the ancient irrigation ditches that he was talking about, I encourage you to watch this film, Paya, The Water Story of the Paiute. It's a short film, and I believe you can watch it online for purchase, so you can click here. So I just wanted to point that out. And then, you know, this is a 16-track story, so there's a lot of wonderful information in here. You can listen to it online, but I do encourage you to actually drive 395 and listen to it as you're experiencing the Eastern Sierra. So that leads me over to Mojave Project, which is an endeavor I've been working on for the past 6 years. I started very late 2014. This project is a bit different than some of my earlier projects because I would do research for a couple of years and then release something publicly. I decided to begin releasing this work in a blog format, and it's more involved than a blog. Some of these stories are 5,000 to 8,000 words. It just depends on the subject. But I create dispatches, which are, you know, they have various multimedia, including audio tracks supporting them, and they're in this form of what's called a field dispatch. So right now I have over 36 different dispatches. The most recent one that I just did is it's a history of the Nevada test site. Part of the Mojave Desert is actually in the Nevada test site, northwest of Las Vegas. And this will be a two-part series actually. So I'm continuing to work on this one. You can filter through a variety of subjects. The idea is these are very disparate subjects, but you can start to see how they relate through, say, culture, geology, and the landscape. There's also guest contributors that are participating in this project. Jeffrey Burbank did this wonderful lengthy piece on the history of cinema in the Mojave Desert. So yeah, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's pretty deep. It's good to go into the field dispatches to see kind of the breadth of work that's been produced for this. And this is a film that KCT, a short film that they published early on when I was working on the project. And current dispatches are displayed in this section here. I've also done some work, some short films. There's Darwin Dreaming and the Armagosa Opera House, and I'm going to continue to work producing some of these short films. So there's a variety of media for you to check out. And there's also audio features. Most of these audio tracks are embedded in the various stories, but if you wanted to take a look at some of these, you can go directly to this part of the site. And I just want to point out, right now there's 2 volumes of readers. The 3rd one will be coming out in a month or so, and these are historical dispatches from this list. All of this content is available online. So the readers, I think, are nice because a lot of people really like to actually sit down and read something, especially since they're lengthy. But I just want to stress that you don't need to purchase the reader to experience the content. And oftentimes you are going to miss out if you don't take a look at the website. So this is a story on the Chumwavy with my friend Matthew Levis. And there's an audio feature in this one that he's talking that, of course, you won't get as part of the reader itself. So, but this is a continuing project. You know, I'm going to keep writing about the Mojave Desert. There's always new and fascinating and very pertinent issues, environmental and otherwise, to discuss. So there's not really an end to this particular project. I think we're getting close to a Q&A now, so I thought maybe we should open it up for questions if this is a good time to do so.
Kim, let me start. While I haven't seen any direct questions in the chat room yet,
Okay.
but let me start by asking you a few things. What would you say in terms of the work you've done on the Mojave Project and perhaps even the earlier projects like Salton Sea and Jackrabbit Homestead? What would be first kind of the 1 or 2 big takeaways you would want most people to come away with after absorbing your work in terms of how to understand the desert, or what are the important things you would love people to come away from?
Well, I think really the diversity of the experience of the desert, and also this idea of breaking down our perceptions that are based on historical constructs. So that is one of the things that I'm really working to dispel, are these stereotypes that seem to persist this idea of desert as wasteland. The desert is not a wasteland. It's a very, very rich ecosystem. And for people to see that aspect of an area that they may not be familiar with, to have a better understanding of why people like myself are concerned about the siting of, say, industrial solar, that can just wipe away desert tortoise habitat, western Joshua tree habitat, which are now, they're being considered as a threatened species by the state of California. And climate is definitely affecting various flora and fauna of the Mojave Desert. So I think right now, having the understanding, the richness and diversity of the place, and also the diversity of the human experience, that's another aspect that I'm really considering, and telling those particular stories when possible, and in their own voice whenever possible too, is very important. There's so much that comes from this particular region. We have to make changes to our lifestyle. We have to create these more sustainable energy sources and things like that. And not only, say, does the solar actually is it sited in these places, but the materials to make the panels are often extracted from the desert. So now not only is the siting of industrial solar and wind farms, but you also have the lithium that would go into the batteries and the rare earths that are going into the different components. Actually, this is going to be one of the dispatch after I finish the Nevada test site series. That's going to be the next one I'm going to delve into. So,
well, of course, the United States history, at least in terms of Euro migration across the continent, has long considered desert spaces to be wastelands entirely.
yes.
In fact, at one time, the Midwest, which is now known for grain and agriculture, even that was considered a desert wasteland at one point. It's so the United States has a long history of dismissing certain areas, out of sight, out of mind, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You think about the uranium digging in and around Navajo lands, and the toxicity that's been left behind, and the effect that that's had on the Diné people. One other aspect has come up, and you and I were talking about it before we started the program tonight, is the explosion of illicit pot growers and pot farms in the Mojave Desert. And can you talk a little bit about that? I mentioned to you that while you were camping, there was a very good long feature article in the LA Times about it, but give us your perspective on that, and kind of what is the impact of illicit pot growing in desert areas?
Well, so there's two different issues that are big galvanizing, issues throughout Morongo Basin. One is the explosion of Airbnbs. So we have in Joshua Tree proper, we have a third of the single family dwellings are now investment Airbnb properties. So that's disruptive. It's very disruptive for people full time. I mean, it is positive. It does bring other types of things with it that are positive, but there's definitely impact. So that's one of the issues that we're facing here. But one of the more recent ones is this explosion of these illegal pot grows, which they're large scale grows, lots of money being put into them, and they have just proliferated throughout the desert. So When I was driving back from Owens Valley, I go through Barstow, I go through a part of Lucerne Valley, and I could see, you know, as the sun was setting, the sun was catching the roofs of the white shade cloths, and, you know, there's just hundreds of these things. The county is having a very hard time keeping up. They are doing a lot of busts and things like that, but, you know, I don't know when it's going to stop. So a lot of these, and I know Ukiah, everyone's familiar up there with the environmental consequences, but water is a big issue. A lot of the desert has significant amounts of groundwater, and there's been a battleground for different issues. We have the Cadiz water mining, which is over in the Amboy in the eastern Mojave. There's actually a dispatch that Julia Isaacs wrote about, that this is the trouble with Cadiz. I encourage you to read. But water is underneath in some places, but, you know, is when you start to suck it up for agriculture, it will dissipate very quickly. So that is one of the issues for development, that these grows are just indiscriminate about how they're obtaining the water, also the chemicals. Out in Wonder Valley, where I did the Homestead project, friends of mine told me about a grow in a square mile section. They completely raised the desert. They just bulldozed it. They make 25-foot high berms around the property, probably going low enough to expose valley fever in the area. So many different issues, and then the chemicals and also the violence that goes along with it. So it's a very big issue. I will write about that. I actually ironically wrote about a small community off 395 at Alento, which is over in the Victorville area, and they were one of the first desert communities to actually legalize medicinal commercial grows and then recreational production in zoned areas of the city, and the tax dollars are really helping them. They're about to go bankrupt. Similar thing has happened in Desert Hot Springs. So this is like a side of what can be positive about this, but of course, doing this research, I learned, like, what is the ecological, what's the footprint, the energy footprint of, you know, pot. And pot is not green. I mean, there's so much energy that goes to light, if it has to be grown indoors, to cool, you know, and all the water. So it's something everyone in the state needs to be aware of, because it's happening all over. So.
You referenced there's a danger as well. One of our viewers tonight in the chat room sent a note about being on a horseback ride and encountering, basically being harassed to leave the area and feeling threatened. And sure enough, later in the ride, they came across hoop houses and green rooms for growing pot. So it's not a place you want to be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kim, there's another subject that I would like to ask you about, and that is the preservation of Joshua trees. A lot of Joshua trees are disappearing out in the desert, and I know that there's a movement afoot to, I believe, establish them as an endangered species or a threatened species in the state of California. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I'm fully in support of this initiative, and it's one of the lawyers that's leading this is actually a neighbor of mine from the Center for Biological Diversity. So I've learned a lot about that, and there's actually a dispatch on. We don't go into the topic of the actual listing because this was written before that, but Chris Clark, who he's an amazing environmental writer who's focused on the desert. He graciously wrote this piece on the Joshua Tree, so you can learn about the history of the Joshua Tree, and then also see artists' work and representation of the Joshua Tree, you know, within this particular dispatch. But yeah, you know, there's so much development going on. Someone just pointed out to me that there was a article this week listing Joshua Tree as the #1 investment real estate opportunity in the country. So, you know, that is pushing up the prices. You know, I guess it's great for my home value, but, you know, people are buying property and building. We had an incident recently where a couple actually, and it went all international, this story, so some of you may have heard about it, but they had dug up Joshua Tree pups and buried them because they were building a house, and they somehow thought that it was okay to you know, get rid of the small ones. So they've been fined, they have to pay court costs. We're hoping that that's gonna at least get the word out, if anything good comes of the situation, that you are not supposed to disturb Joshua trees. And if you need to do any kind of construction, you need to do it properly through the county and work, you know, with the right people to, you know, move them or change your design, you know. So.
Kim, we have a question in the chat room. Have you done any research about the plans for a railroad coming through the desert in the 19th century and in the 21st century?
So, well, there were various railroads that supported extraction, whether it was borates, gold, silver. So I've kind of looked at those lines in regards to them through this piece I wrote about gold. It's actually a 3-part series. So this is Desert Gold 1, Desert Gold 2, and this is about recreational gold mining, contemporary gold mining. But I haven't actually looked at the railroads specifically, you know, in the area. There could be a possibility. I'll put that on my list to look into.
Okay. I'm not seeing any additional questions or comments in our chat room.
Okay.
We're a little past 8 o'clock. I kind of would like to finish, Kim, if you will, on a couple of more fun notes. One of the places that I adore and fascinates me. Oh, excuse me. There is a question. Nana's asked if you could discuss, before I get to my fun question,
Okay.
about the creation of the Salton Sea. That is something that very few, you know, not a lot of us know a whole lot about.
Yeah. Well, in a nutshell, so the Salton Sea was the result of an engineering accident in the Imperial Valley. They were diverting the entire flow of the Colorado River into the Salton Sink area, which created the Imperial Valley. Once you brought water to the desert, you could farm all year round and provide vegetables to the East Coast via railway. So that was the reason, you know, the water was being diverted. Well, in 1904, they had a really intense winter, a lot of water coming through the tributaries of the Colorado River, and the dikes, you know, broke, and the entire flow of the river ended up going into the Salton Sink, which is just a few feet above the lowest, above bad water in Death Valley. Over geological time, the Salton Sink has been a great sea called Lake Cahuilla. And you can see the water line way, way up on the mountains. So this was a vast, vast body of water. And so, you know, over time, the Colorado River, all of that stuff, all that material that came from the Grand Canyon had to go somewhere. So that would come down, it would build up over time. And like we know, rivers are live, you know, they're moving constantly until humans are trying to control them. But naturally, they're going to take different courses. So there's this idea that the Salton Sea is an accident. And that was one of the reasons why early on environmentalists, except for Audubon, because they knew this was one of the largest supporters of the Pacific Flyway when there was fish in the Salton Sea. They discounted it. And over time, people started to realize, well, nature, animals, they don't know borders. They don't know what is considered pristine or beautiful wilderness. They're going to use what is available. And when you have 98% of coastal wetlands gone, you know, they've been developed, they started to use that particular area. So they got it under control in about 2 years, that flow. They were able to, you know, cut off that flow, divert it back into the old channels, and the Salton Sea was formed. So now waters that normally would support the Salton Sea, it's a desert body of water, so it's very arid, so it is going to evaporate and start to concentrate all those different heavy metals and salts and things into the water. It's shrinking now. And there's calls for maybe doing some lithium processing. There's geothermal activity. It has very young volcanoes around the area. Of course, it's right next to the San Andreas. So we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to also just share that Kim has a wonderful photo essay of the Salton Sea on her website, and I encourage you to go take a look at that. It's another boom and bust story. The whole notion of the little towns that sprung up around and resort towns that are kind of ghost towns now. So here's what I wanted to end with. It's Kim, and I don't know how much time you've spent or studied it, but one of my favorite places out in that area where you live is the Integratron and the rock out at Landers.
Giant rock.
And I'm wondering if you just want to share some of your thoughts and experiences with that.
Well, it's such a fascinating story, and I think the best way to to experience it is to read this dispatch. I was really fascinated. So if you don't know about giant rock, it is a giant rock. This is it. This is in the late 1950s when the UFO convention would happen out here. And this is just like such a fantastic history. It would be hard to make this up. At one point on the rear side, the back side of what you're seeing, Frank Kritzer actually dug a subterranean home, which he lived in, and there was a lot of intrigue about this. He was a character, he was a desert rat, and he mysteriously blew up after a confrontation with the police. This is actually a rendering of him in his underground home. He did not survive. So he was the first, 20th century occupant of Giant Rock. And before he had died, George Van Tassel had befriended him and was coming out to visit. So after Frank's death, he moved his family out there, and he eventually started writing books and giving talks. This is actually a talk about UFO visitation. So I actually did research, and there's other essays that I cite in here. So there's been a lot of people that have kind of looked at this story, but this is kind of a critical look in trying to iron out some of the fallacies, let's say, of this particular story. So this is a really fun one to read. This is actually a photograph. Here's Frank. This is his underground home. So there's a lot of fantastic stories in the desert. And just before, the other one I want to point out, which is a little bit less known, is if you're into that Integratron one, read this one too. So David, I think you really like this one. This is about a lost river of gold underneath the cocoa leaf, this chasm, this place where people have been for over 100 years. They're continuing to actually look for this lost river of gold, which geologists at the very end of this, it's discounted, it doesn't exist. So, but they're still looking for it. So there's lots of crazy stories in the desert about this type of thing. So,
indeed. Well, Kim, I'll tell you one big takeaway I've had, not only from your talk tonight, but from in preparing to meet you and have you on this program, is what a treasure trove of information your website is. And I really want to encourage people, you can get totally lost in your website. I mean, in a good way, just going from one essay to another, to a little film, to photo essays. It's just wonderful. You could spend a lot of time on your website and never get through it all. So I commend you on that, and I hope people will be excited to go visit it as well.
Great, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and that's the whole idea, is just, it gave me an excuse to go out to these places and talk to people and, basically explore. So I'm glad that you're enjoying it. But I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight.
I am putting it, whoops, hang on a second. I am putting in the chat room now a link to a very short survey that I hope people will just take a minute or two to either click on the link or copy and paste it into your browser and fill it out later. It just helps us understand how engaging the programs are and what we can do better in the future. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Kim, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for you taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
Sharing your website. And I also want to encourage our guests out there, our visitors out there, if you haven't been to the museum, to see the exhibition Postcards from Mecca, where it's open through August 22nd. It's a wonderful little show that's really takes us back to the 1920s and 30s and what the whole area of Coachella Valley and the outskirts of that looked like back then through the eyes of two adventuring young women. So I hope you'll join us for that. And again, we have another program on August the 12th on Dorothea Lange. I hope you'll return for that virtual program as well. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kim. Kim, I'll email you with some stuff after or in the next days or two.
Okay.
So thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll let you know via social media when this recording has been posted on our YouTube channel. All right. I'm getting a lot of lovely comments from people. Thanks, Kim. This was fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. Good night, all.